Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, the Year of Interference continues with internationally best-selling author Brad Parks, only this time it's not just a lifestyle, it's a book. The premise: quantum physicist Matt Bronick begins suffering inexplicable seizure-like fits after exposure to a potentially life-changing virus. When he goes missing under suspicious circumstances, it's up to his wife Bridget and an aging detective with something to prove to discover the truth of his disappearance. A Connecticut native, Parks now makes his home in Virginia with his wife and 2 children. He is a graduate of Dartmouth College and was a journalist with the Wall Street Journal and Star-Ledger before transitioning to fiction. His books have been published in 15 languages, and he has won the Seamus, Lefty, and Nero Awards, a distinction that remains his alone. Parks' previous works include a 6-book series featuring investigative reporter Carter Ross, as well as the standalone novels Say Nothing, Closer Than You Know, and The Last Act. Interference is the author's 10th book. Publishers Weekly gave the title a starred review and called it intelligent and fast-paced, noting, "Readers will fully engage with the well-drawn characters as Parks convincingly reveals the science that buttresses the suspenseful plot. Michael Crichton fans won't want to miss this one." While 2020 will undoubtedly go down in history for a pandemic and politics, some of us will also remember it as the year that Brad Parks did quantum physics. Prepare to have your minds blown. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Central Booking. Today, I am in the virtual company of Brad Parks, whose newest book, Interference, is out right now from Thomas & Mercer, which is an Amazon imprint. And you also, to the best of my knowledge, are still the only author to have won the Seamus, Nero, and Lefty Awards. That's a nice distinction to have. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, John. I can also juggle and catch grapes in my mouth. So if you want to add that to the list of things that just no other author can possibly do, that would be fine.
I know. I was like, why is that not in the bio? Should that not be in the bio?
Yeah, strangely, the publisher wasn't as interested in those facts. I never know how these things are going to fly.
We'll talk to them. We'll get there. So anyway, so your new book, Interference, basically, you could say that it could be called Brad Parks Does Quantum Physics.
Right.
Blew me away. I was like, oh my gosh, it's not what I expected from you. So I have to ask, that's a heavy topic. So what compelled you to broach that, and how did you take it and bring it down to my level? Because I'm pretty much a neophyte, and I was like, am I going to understand this book? And I think I sort of did and could. So how do you take something so big and make little old me understand?
Well, so it's actually, that part is easy because I'm a neophyte too, John. So if I can explain it to myself, I can explain it to you. Because basically, I was that guy back in the back part of the physics classroom with you going, what's the teacher talking about? And you're like, I have no idea. I'm like, me neither. But a funny thing, that was high school anyway. And then a funny thing,
I knew you looked familiar.
Yeah, exactly.
You're asking the wrong person, Brad.
Yeah.
I don't know either.
So we went to high school in different parts of Connecticut, but I feel like that conversation could have happened, yes. Right? But a funny thing happened in college, and that is I really fell in love with physics, not necessarily the doing of physics, because I had already proven to myself I was bad at the doing of physics, but with the ideas of physics and with the stories that went with those ideas. And there's just this fascinating narrative of this group of people we call physicists who have been trying to understand the world in their own peculiar mathematical way. And I really got into how they, their various efforts to do that. So I've sort of been this amateur, very amateur physics nerd through a number of years. And as a matter of fact, I had tried to write versions of this book probably 2 or 3 other times throughout the last 10 years or so. And I know because I have this pile of notes that I would go back to, and I'd be like, oh, here's the time in 2014 when I tried to do it. Here's the time in 2012 when I tried to do it. It was like excavating the layers from a geological standpoint. But what changed this time was, I think the first couple times I had approached it, I kept trying to think, okay, so how do I fit my book to the science? And I kind of just couldn't do it. And the big brainstorm this time was, no, fit the science to your book. And within about 15 minutes of when I had that aha eureka moment, I had the basic plot of interference kind of sketched out, that there would be this physicist who was poking at the mysteries of the quantum universe. He would start to get sick because of this, and then he would even disappear because of this, and then they would have to use quantum physics to find him. And so now, okay, now I know you've read the book, but I'm assuming your viewers have not. So this is going to be our science lesson for the evening. As John knows, because he's read the book, but you at home do not know, the principle behind this book is called quantum entanglement. And it is this really mind-boggling thing that every now and then two particles can be born, what we call entangled. And when that happens, you can separate them by any distance, and you tickle one and the other still feels it, no matter how far apart you may have separated them. Like you could be like a galaxy apart, right? And this kind of weird connection remains. And we don't understand how this is actually happening, but we've now demonstrated it in laboratories. We've shown this with particles, we've shown this with molecules, whole systems of molecules. It's this really mind-blowing thing that experimentally we have proven. So the big what if that really drives this book forward is, okay, so if that can be true with particles or with molecules, what if it was true with people? Like, haven't you ever felt like you were entangled with another person, whether it was, your spouse or your sibling or whoever it was, that kind of intrinsic connection we somehow all share. And could that connection be used to find a missing person?
Awesome. And when you said tickle, I think I felt it. I almost gave it.
Yeah, well, John, most of the time on the Zoom, you can't see where my hands are. So woohoo!
I know, I had to cover it up. I didn't want to interrupt your explanation. And I just want to know, why couldn't, my high school physics teacher explain it like that? Because that was like on my level.
So I honestly, I think there's a right amount of knowledge to have, and I think sometimes the high school physics teacher knows too much. And I am not burdened by that extra layer of knowledge or expertise. So I really am trying to understand it like, like a crime fiction author, so it really does kind of keep it on a very simple level. But the thing about quantum physics is, in order to, and this took me a while to realize, but you sort of have to embrace the weirdness of it. And when you say, but wait, I don't get it, neither does anybody else. Like, it is really truly a strange, and mind you, this is all, the quantum world is all really, really tiny stuff you can't actually see. And the rules at that level are just completely different than the rules in the world that we see.
Sure. And I have to tell you too, so my high school physics teacher was like, Mr. Record, if there's anybody from Portland, Connecticut watching, like, everybody's gonna like hail to the man. Brilliant. But he would literally interrupt our classes because the phone in his office would ring and it would be NASA or the White House. Like, truly, there are pictures of him with like presidents on the wall. It was insane. But I
clearly, yes, too smart to be teaching dumb guys like you and I. That's all there is to it.
I'm telling you, that class was more intimidating than 4 years of college. Like, I'm like, if I can survive this, I can survive anything. But anyway, so I wanted to ask you, so you mentioned, you have a character named Matt Bronick, and he is working with this virus and he disappears, and we're not really sure, why. Has he done this himself? Have people made him disappear? But before he goes off the grid, as you had mentioned, he starts sort of having these really inexplicable sort of fits that are seizure-like, and nobody can explain what's going on. So can you talk, a little bit about how you were, devious enough in your mind to come up with something that really the doctors can't explain, and then to use that as a reason to sort of make him fall off the grid? Because I think it's a great plot device.
Yeah, so I think that the beautiful thing about medicine, and most doctors who have been doing it for long enough realize this, there's actually a ton about it we don't understand. So there are a lot of things. So I have a doctor buddy of mine, Dr. Randy Ferentz. Hey, Doc, how are you? Who is also, he's also a writer on the side. So he kind of understands the writer's mentality, and we can have these lovely conversations where we'll be like, all right, Doc, I need to have the character do this, or this happened to him. And he'll just start kind of spinning off, well, it could be this, it could be that, and he gives me these wonderful phrases that I then pilfer and use in the book. Like when the neurologist comes in and says, well, yeah, at this point, I think we're looking for zebras. And it's like, looking for zebras? because when you hear hoof prints, think horses, not zebras, until it's no longer horses that we're looking for because we've ruled out all the horses. So it must be something really unusual, a zebra. When a doctor says something like that, you just like, absolutely, you write it right down. But I think, the other thing is, I mean, and hasn't the coronavirus thing proven this to us? Like our limitations as human beings, as much as we've been trying to understand all this stuff, there's all kinds of weird things. And this is just, with COVID, this is just one disease, one virus out of the many thousands and millions of viruses that are kicking around this planet that is doing stuff to us that we literally do not understand. Like why, I was on a BoucherCon panel with Karen Olson of Connecticut, wonderful writer, and she had COVID. I think she shared this publicly. I'm not telling stories out of school. She is still suffering from certain aspects of that months after she has, quote, recovered. And why is that? And really nobody can give her a straight answer. So I think you're always on safe ground to a certain extent when you're dealing with medical mysteries. And the important thing in terms of where a thriller is concerned is that eventually the mystery will be explained and will be solved. But of course, you have to get to 3 pages until the end before you get to that part.
Sure. And I want to ask you about Bridget too. So Bridget is Matt's wife, and she is, suffering from a condition where she has hearing loss, and it's getting worse and worse. It's getting progressive. And I would assume, that's obviously a very real condition that people suffer from. And so I think you handled it really, authentically, sensitively. So can you talk about your research into that? And then also how she's sort of able to use a condition that some people would see as a deficit sort of to her advantage?
Yeah, totally, John. Thank you. That's a great question. So I have this kind of basic rule for my protagonists, and Bridget Bronick is very much the protagonist of this novel. And that is, I have to like them. Right? Like I can't spend 400 pages with a jerk. And so as I was in the beginning process of brainstorming this novel, and bear in mind, this is like my 10th novel. So, there's been a lot of characters who have come and gone through my manuscripts over the years and whatnot. So I'm kind of thinking about this new character. And while this was happening, we got this new neighbor, and her name is Melissa, and she's a librarian with hearing loss. And she's, smart, she's funny, she was good to talk to. And I liked her the way I just have to somehow like fundamentally like my protagonist. So at a certain point, it just kind of clicked. I'm like, I know, I'll make Bridget Bronick a librarian with hearing loss. Here we go. This is perfect. So at that point, I started talking with my neighbor, Melissa, about her condition and whatnot. Now, it turns out she and Bridget have different diagnoses, not worth getting into the nitty gritty details, but it really was, I was cognizant of the fact that this is not a character we find in thrillers very often. A character with hearing loss. So let's face it, your typical thriller, you have somebody who can break somebody's jaw by looking at it, not having this kind of a condition. So it was definitely important to me to get it right. I talked with Melissa. I talked with her audiologist. It turns out that a town I used to live in Virginia, Stanton, Virginia, is home to the Virginia School for the Deaf and the Blind. So I'd been around the deaf community quite a bit. But then at a certain point in time, there is this cool thing of, okay, I have given the character a disability, but I'm always fascinated by how often disabilities do actually come with special abilities. Some of my favorite examples of this are like dyslexia, which we, refer to as a learning problem, whatever. Dyslexics are wildly creative people who go on to be entrepreneurs at an astonishingly high rate, and they end up being inventors, and they start businesses. They do these wonderful things, even though, God, reading that textbook in school is just hell for them, right? Or another favorite example, I had a cousin who had Down syndrome. Do you know that people with Down syndrome, like 98% of them report being happy and satisfied with their lives? You can find no other cohort of people who are 98% satisfied with their lives. And isn't that another kind of special ability that comes with a disability? So in the case of Bridget Bronick having hearing loss, she also has the ability to read lips. And don't we think that could come in real handy somewhere late in a clutch part of a thriller? Oh yes, we think so.
I know, not exactly a spoiler alert right there, but
well, but how is she going to do it? When's it going to happen? That's what you have to read the book to find out.
So true. And I love how you said, how you take somebody who has a perceived disability, and really it opens yourself up to exploring what the extra abilities are. And you probably don't know this, but in my other life and career outside of books, I worked in special education, and I worked with
Huh.
the developmentally disabled. And you were so right. And to the point of, people with Down syndrome being happy and satisfied, largely they are. And
Yeah.
it really gives you sort of a perspective shift, which is so important. I mean, we were
Yeah.
talking before we started recording about perspective, but I think that's my word for the year. And hey, 2020, something good came out of 2020. You took that idea of quantum
Yeah.
physics, and you got it into a published book. So I feel like I should recognize that. There's the good thing of
Well,
2020.
and I love that you work with people with disabilities, and like when the light kind of turned on for me, even though I had this cousin who had Down syndrome, and I kind of grew up with him and whatever, fine. I mean, he was older than me, but there was a certain age where we could always play together because we were into the same things, and fine. When it really clicked was actually I was covering the Special Olympics for the Boston Globe, and which is let's be honest, like you're a sports writer covering the Special Olympics is like, yes, that's what they're going to give like the young kid, the rookie, whatever, go out and cover. But you saw, and I don't know if I haven't talked about this in years, so like, but there was this special thing that happens when an athlete, any athlete, achieves something they had never achieved before or they never thought they could achieve. And I noticed that, say, the pride their parents had, or the way they felt about themselves, or sort of the context of that achievement was absolutely no different whether I was covering the Boston Red Sox or whether I was covering the Special Olympics. And yeah, it does kind of shift your way of looking at this, of like, wow, this Special Olympics athlete is every bit as extraordinary as an Olympian or a Major League Baseball player or whatever in their own way. And we can celebrate that as much as we would any other achievement. I don't know. It was just, yeah, it's a cool way of looking at life, and
Yeah,
sometimes I'm even successful at it.
absolutely. Yeah, right. That's the hope. Hey, I
Yeah,
figure
we try, right?
1 out of 10 times you're doing all right. And so I wanted to ask you too. So there's sort of a co-protagonist in this book, because you have a detective, Emmett Webster, and he's at a
Right.
crossroads personally, professionally. It's not a good time for him, and he actually gets shifted to the missing persons case, and then he gets involved in mass disappearance. And I'm wondering, can you tell me a little bit about how where he finds himself in life, how that lends itself, one, to how he investigates the case, why the case is so significant to him, but also the dynamic that he establishes with Bridget as a civilian, because they really do have a great interplay, which isn't necessarily what happens when there's civilian
Right.
interference in a crime investigation.
Right. So I do a horrible thing to Emmett Webster in the very first scene in which he enters this book, and that is I have his wife die. Which is, I think, so Emmett's in his mid to early 50s, something like that. And that's not a time when you're, of course, expecting to lose your spouse. They had just bought an RV, and they were planning on retiring and driving around the country in their RV and visiting their kids in these far-flung countries. And they have this whole life planned out when his wife dies of sleep apnea. And what an astonishing thing to happen, what an incredible disruption. And so, yeah, Emmett is just coming off of that incredible personal tragedy when he is, for professional reasons, transferred to the missing persons unit, which is a demotion for him because he had been in major crime. And he realizes that in this case, finding Bridget Bronick's husband, a missing person, does feel like a calling, because yeah, he misses his wife every single day, right? And he gets what it is to really miss someone. So I think this case does have that kind of personal connection for him. And I think, especially in 2020, we have seen, let's be honest, some of the worst of what law enforcement is.
Right.
And none of us can forget what we saw happen to George Floyd and certainly Breonna Taylor and some of the other victims that we've been talking so much about. However, and we don't excuse that in any way, of course. I mean, it's completely unforgivable, and it should never happen. The vast majority of law enforcement people are really good folks, right? And we shouldn't lose sight of this. I always was amazed by back when I was a reporter in Newark. I did a big piece about this rogue group of cops. There were like 5 of them who were holding up drug dealers. They were stealing money from drug dealers, right?
Right.
But this was 5 cops out of a force of 1,200.
Right.
So what those 5 cops did to the reputations of the other 1195 was this astonishing thing, because then every single housing project I went into, I would hear about the dirty cops. They're stealing, they're thieves, they're no better than us, yada, yada. It was 5 guys, you know? So I think Emmett Webster is, you know, probably more the typical law enforcement, very human, very dedicated to his job, also going through things in his own life and in his own right. I mean, and I think, you know, you think of some of the great police procedurals. Well, I'll rip off a line from Michael Connelly. You need to see not only how the cops work on the crime, you need to see how the crime worked on the cops. So I think there's a lot of that really informs the character of Emmett Webster, and hopefully you feel as he's solving this crime along with you.
Absolutely. I would like to revisit him, you know, just saying.
I'll see what I can do, John.
You know, if you can make that happen, maybe, you know, if he happens to survive, could go either way. But I have to ask you about another character too. So you have a character, Sean Plotner, who is a Dartmouth, you know, a grad, very, very like uber wealthy. And he really wants his name to be remembered, and he wants to attach his name to the work that Matt's been doing. And you develop him in such a way that we don't know his true motivations until the very end of the book. And so throughout the entirety, you know, he could be a good guy, he could be a bad guy, he could be a somewhere in between guy. And, you know, the reader still has, I think, some sympathy for him, even though we also have some suspicions of him and what it is that he's out for. So can you talk about how you develop a character like that who is very complex and who sort of plays both sides?
So yeah, John, aren't we all a little mix of good and bad? So okay, honest engine time. I sort of loosely based Sean Plotner on this guy my wife had dated before me. And he was the kind of guy you just hated. He would never go to class. He would be baked all the time. And then he would show up at the exam and he would ace the thing. I mean, like, the guy literally never went to class, and I think graduated Dartmouth College with a nearly 4.0 GPA. He was that smart and that detestable, right? So I was kind of like imagining what would happen to that guy as he goes into the workplace and into the world. And of course, he'll be enormously successful because his brain is so much bigger than everybody else's and whatnot. And so I started off like really actually wanting to hate him, because it's my wife's ex-boyfriend, right? This is a perfectly detestable character. Yet as I develop him, I kind of couldn't hate him. I actually started to like him, because it turns out that after he was a burnout all through college, he'd really kind of knuckled down and really applied himself and was really doing these, you know, incredible things. And so I'm doing this stuff and I'm like, gosh, why am I liking this guy? And I think it's a trap that a lot of crime fiction writers and thriller writers fall into. We fall in love with our bad guys, you know, we just do. And, you know, because you realize they're really, truly, the bad guy doesn't walk around thinking to himself. If we're talking about a real novel, you know, not some kind of cartoon version, no bad guy thinks of himself as I'm the bad guy. No, they feel fully justified in their actions. So I think that's always an important thing with Sean Plotner, is he feels 100% justified doing everything he does in this novel. And yeah, we'll just have to see how that turns out.
Yes, very intriguing character, you know, kept me turning pages. But I wanted to ask you too, so your narrative, it's great because not only do you alternate characters, so, you know, you get Bridget, you get the detective, and you get Plotner, but you shift perspectives as well. So Bridget is first person and the detective and Plotner are third person. So can you talk about, one, you know, how you think doing that enhances the story that you're telling, but also, do you find it more difficult to write one or the other, or is it not different for you?
You know, it's strange. I think just about every book I've ever written has some first person and some third person. And John, basically it's because I like to cheat. So there are aspects of the first person I really enjoy, that closeness you feel with the character, the way I think emotionally you just automatically identify with the character. You can really give the reader a true sense of who the person is when you're really speaking to them as them. And I almost think of myself as an actor when I'm doing this, of like I'm playing the role of this person, whatnot. But then there is that problem with the first person, and that is they only know what they know.
That's true.
And those are a set of blinders that sometimes as an author I want to be able to take off. So that's why I cheat and do third person. So it's just that simple, just that quick. I want to be able to give you kind of a little taste of the world. And I think there are times from a storytelling standpoint when if you're trying to do it all in first person, there's just too much going on that I can't tell you about, and I need to find a way to tell you. So I break out and do third. Do you still respect me, John?
I do.
Okay.
How can I not? You know,
I don't know. I can come up with a list of reasons for that, John, but
I'd wait to tell you until after we stopped recording.
All right, fair enough.
All right, so I want to ask you too. So there's sort of a subplot that involves the Me Too movement, and it's really interesting, just in the sense that we've seen so many men abuse positions of power. It's become a very real thing, and I think because of that, in some ways, we've sort of moved away from a presumption of innocence to a presumption of guilt. And so the way that you portray this in the book sort of shows the nuances of a he said, she said dynamic. Can you talk about why you wanted to make that an element of the book, but also how you do show considerations to both parties in that he said, she said?
Right. So, and it's actually, this is the second book in a row where I've had elements of Me Too being brought in, and I'm certainly, I am sensitive to that movement. I don't want to be hopping up on a soapbox, but I'm definitely someone who preaches, frankly, guys are the ones who have created this problem. Let's be realistic about it. And therefore, let's be fair. We're the ones who have to clean it up. So that's kind of an aside, I guess. But in this case, it is, I trip over the he said, she said thing, because I think that is something that historically and still currently has been used to devalue women's stories and discredit them. A good friend of mine, Allison, why am I blanking on your last name? Because of course she's a former federal sex crimes prosecutor, and she's written novels and they're wonderful. And I actually seriously have one on a nightstand. Anyway, Allison, my friend, the sex crimes prosecutor, God, I hope she's not watching this. She'll excoriate me. But she talks about how, like, he said, she said is really kind of a cop-out by the authorities, because there's always a lot more underneath it's like, well, if he said that, can we prove it? Can we not prove it? And I think that's what you see happening in this book, of like, what a good investigator should do is not just go, well, it's a he said, she said, I quit, yeah. but really try to pry into the layers and who's lying, who's telling the truth, why might they be lying, why might they be telling the truth. So we know statistically, and I don't know, I think I bumped across this stat somewhere, that something like 92% of sexual assault allegations are in fact credible, which is that's obviously a very, very high number, but that of course does leave 8% that are not. And so I think we all, kind of have to bear that in mind, that this thing is never quite cut and dried, which is why we actually should put more resources into attacking these crimes that are very, very, very serious crimes and deserve really our highest attention. Absolutely. That was a long answer, but it's John, it's one of those subjects that I honestly feel like as guys, like we almost feel like we can't talk about it, right? Because like it's like, oh, you have to be so careful. You don't want to offend anyone, and that's absolutely true. But the problem with that is, of course, in not talking about it, we're not actually dealing with the issue. So I'm a big believer in maybe saying a little too much, and then you can correct people if they're wrong. And certainly if you have viewers who are watching this and saying, hey, Parks, you're a total idiot, and here's why about this, I really honestly hope I hear from them, because, hey, we've all got stuff to learn, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I really appreciated, you including that in the story, because there was the subtext and the nuance to the he said, she said, and you don't just see it as black or white. And like you said, that is part of the problem, I think, is we tend to see it as a black or white issue, and it's not always that. So I thought it was handled in a really, deep and sensitive way. So I'm glad that we could talk about that for a moment.
Cool.
And if you don't mind, a couple more questions for you. I'm going to shift sort of to more broad topics now, since we've talked a bit about the book and we don't want to spoil too much. But I did want to ask you, so you mentioned, your wife and how you were able to draw upon the ex-boyfriend in creating the character in this book. But as a husband and as father, how does that change, the thematic elements that you find yourself visiting in the books, or does it? And then on the more pragmatic side, how do you shift your writing schedule to accommodate the fact that you do have, a wife and children, which is a bit different than
Right.
when you don't have children and you can write until you can't write anymore.
Right. So I think thematically it's changed everything for me. I mean, there's a reason why the character who ran the show in my first 6 novels, Carter Ross, he was single and a bachelor, which is I was a bachelor but not single when I started writing it. So but I was like 30 years old. I was very, very close to that kind of lifestyle, whatnot. And as time went along, suddenly, Carter actually, book 6 ends off, not to ruin anything, but suddenly Carter's fiance is pregnant, or his not fiance. It's very complicated. Anyhow, and then the next book I wrote was Say Nothing, which is about a judge who has 2 6-year-olds, twins, who are kidnapped. And basically the deal is it's a ransom, and the kidnappers will give the children back when the judge gives the verdict that they want, right? And so this was a very deep family novel. And then the next novel was about a woman whose baby had been taken away from her by social services. So again, we kind of get like all this kind of family stuff. And again, in the last act, which is the one novel before this, we get a young family starting out and whatnot. So I think those are definitely the things that are in my life and that are the closest to me, and that are the things I'm working out. Like, as I think about, what is not only the most important thing in my life, because I think most people would say, oh yeah, family is the most important thing in my life, but like, it's also sort of the most central thing right now. I mean, my children are in school. My wife and I have, a pretty even split of who does what with them. She does the mornings while I write. I do the afternoons while she works. It kind of works. And I mean, it's a huge part of my life right now. And so I think it's only natural that those kind of themes would come out in fiction. As for the actual day-to-day doing of that, it's obviously gotten a little more difficult during the pandemic because there's nowhere to go. John, I can't escape. So I've actually, I won't show them to you because they're probably gross, but I have developed a secret weapon: wax earplugs, my friend. I stuck those things in and I put them in, and it's like, I don't know what my family is doing just on the other side of this wall. Actually, they're always doing it, and I have no idea, because I stick the earplugs in, and and people will come in and out of the room, and I'll kind of just growl at them. I've definitely, let's be honest, I've yelled at my kids more in the last 6 months than I had ever before, for sure. But it's a difficult time. I think honestly though, I am forever mindful of this chart that I saw in the New York Times right when the pandemic began. And it was looking at who has the most dangerous jobs. And so they put so we're going back to science class or math class. Are you ready for this, John? Here we are. We're back in Connecticut high school. On this axis was like the frequency of contact you have with people. And on this axis was the closeness of that contact, right? So like doctors and nurses and whatnot were all the way up over here, really dangerous job. Writers were all the way down here, safest job possible. We were actually next to lumberjacks as having the safest job possible. So I'm kind of always aware that throughout this whole thing, I've actually got it pretty good.
I understand that. I mean, I joke with people, it's not funny, but had we writers or, people who work at home, like not turned on the TV for a little bit, would we have known anything changed? Because, we're used to isolating. But I did want to ask you, because you actually, your preference has sort of always been to write in public places. I know you used to write at a Hardee's, and if I understand correctly from reading the acknowledgments in this book, that you now haunt a Chili's too. So one, why is it that you like to write in a public place? Because I know that doesn't work for a lot of people, though obviously, some people do very well in that situation. And then, what kind of adjustment has that been for you from being able to write every day, in a Hardee's to stuck in your office, with your wax earplugs, because that's what it's come to in 2020.
So the writing in public thing, I think part of it is I was a newspaper journalist, and a newsroom is a busy place filled with people. And oh, by the way, I was a sports writer for a lot of that time. So I was used to writing in arenas full of people. I was just always used to having people around. And there's something about that energy. I think there's also something about, and this, bear in mind, is very much only in my mind, John, but there's this accountability thing. So I have not been to Hardee's or Chili's since the pandemic began, because to sit inside with a mask on, potentially me, if I'm an asymptomatic carrier, spewing out virus for 4 hours, and all the poor people who were working there catching it from me, I don't need that on my conscience, right? So I've strictly stayed away from any kind of indoor spaces like that. There is something about, back in my Hardee's, where I'm there working, right? And the people at Hardee's, they're there working too. Like the Hardee's biscuit maker. Do you know when a Hardee's biscuit maker reports for work every morning? 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's when they have to start making the biscuits. And something you never hear a Hardee's biscuit maker say is, I don't feel like making the biscuits today. I'm not inspired to write the biscuits and to make the biscuits. No, they make the damn biscuits. And so I kind of feel like I'm there, kind of like the biscuit maker. I'm making the biscuits. And there is that accountability of they're working, I'm working. I can't be goofing around on my laptop, playing Tetris or whatever. Oh, that was like a very 1989 reference. I hope we appreciate that. But it's like I'm there to do a job and to work. And so that's what I do. I go to the Hardee's and 4 hours a day. And so it's been an adjustment. It's been a bad one. I can't wait for this vaccine to come out so I can get back to Hardee's, to be quite honest. Pity. It's awful.
It's a tough life, but I get it.
It's really not, John.
A little change like that can make a huge difference. I said the people at Dunkin' Donuts probably think that I'm dead, because I've, from being there every day or going through the drive-through, they literally haven't seen me in 7 months. They're just,
I am Facebook friends with some of my Hardee's buddies, so we're good. They know I'm still alive. They know I'll be back someday. We just got to give it some time.
Yeah. Well, every once in a while, if my wife has to run out, to do grocery shopping or something, I'll be like, maybe you could stop for a coffee on the way home. And, if you recognize the people, tell them we're okay. We'll be back someday. All right. Last couple questions for you, if you don't mind. So one, Interference is your 10th book, which, that's a great accomplishment. I mean, you've been at this for a long time now. So what are the biggest changes? Because the publishing industry is always in flux, and it changes all the time, and often not necessarily for the better. So, how do you stick with it, and how have you continued to adapt to all the changes that are around you? Because they're pretty much endless.
Yeah, so it's really easy, John. I have no choice. I literally have no other marketable skills. This is the only way I have to support myself. So I had really better make it work. I think, honestly, desperation is a very much an undervalued virtue, and that's kind of what keeps me going. This is what I got. I mean, as an ex-newspaper journalist, I can't go back to what I did. There's nobody in the newspaper industry who is looking to add staff at this moment. So I don't know. The thing that how to put this. For as crazy as things get in publishing, and yes, publishing has gone through, any number of the sky is falling moments in the 10, 11 years I've been in it. but the glue, the thing that always matters most is story.
Yeah.
Like people on some level just want a good story. So write a good story and have real characters in there that people can really relate to, and surprise your readers. God, readers just love to be surprised. And I think as much as anything, I don't want to say I don't care about what's going on in publishing, because that's not true. I'm very much invested in it. I read my publisher's marketplace, my publisher's lunch, all that. I'm always kind of being informed. But at a certain point in time, that stuff goes away, and it really is just me and the story and my craft. And although I've been at this a long time, thanks for pointing that out. I think, John, the first time you and I ever spoke, we both had a lot more hair,
Yes,
right?
it's true. I'll show you.
Like,
This is how
at the
bad.
same, oh yeah, yeah, exactly. And we've both grown the beard, because like the beard does kind of like distract from the hairline a little bit. It's always good, but at the same time, like, the exciting thing about what we do as writers is that it's a long career, and the peak is still somewhere out there. Like I think people who are really dedicated to their craft, like I think of like Don Winslow, who started writing books when he was in his 30s, much like I did, but is still like measurably, and you can see it, improving at his craft, and he's well into his 60s. And there are authors who've done that well into their 70s, like where it's about an author's will and their drive to keep getting better and better and better. And that's kind of exciting. So as much as I pay attention to the publishing thing, ultimately I'm worried about me and my craft, and making sure that every book I write is the best book I've ever written.
Sure.
And then I look back at the books I was writing 4 or 5 years ago and say, God, that's crap. I do so much better now. And I hope to be able to keep saying that, every 4 to 5 years as we go through. That'll be a good sign.
Awesome. So my takeaway right now is drive plus desperation equals good. All right.
That's it, man.
But I think that's a great point. Write the best book that you can, and everything else will work itself out. But as long as you're writing the best book that you can, you are controlling what you can control,
Right.
and then you get to worry about the rest later. Okay, last 2 questions. So
Sure.
I'm pestering everybody with this one.
Okay.
So best advice that you ever got, either in terms of writing or just, a more creative life. But then on the other hand, the best advice that you never got and had to learn for yourself, and wish that maybe somebody could have clued you in a bit sooner.
Okay, so best advice I ever got. So I'll steal a line from Reed Farrell Coleman. He says, "Fall in love with writing, not with what you've written." And I think that's such a powerful thing, especially for people who are just starting out. The dirty little secret of this game is that most of us never got our first manuscript published, right? For most of us, that manuscript is in the drawer, as we call it, although it's really on a hard drive now. Who are we kidding? But and as I've gotten to know so many authors, and that's really actually one of the best parts of this gig, is getting to know other authors and becoming friends with them. Like the numbers of like really seriously talented writers that it's like they didn't get published until their 4th manuscript or their 7th manuscript or their 9th manuscript. I mean, my God, but there's some wonderful, wonderful writers. So my favorite example of this lately is Don Bentley, who just wrote a wonderful, his debut novel, Without Sanction, came out earlier this year, military thriller. I don't want to misquote Don, but I forget what number manuscript that was, but there had definitely been a number of manuscripts and or drafts. I forget but like over many years, like he had been, and then finally this book comes out and it's phenomenal, right? And that's just really exciting. And I think that's because like you fall in love with the process, right? You fall in love with the doing of it, and not necessarily the result so much, because the result is more fungible. First of all, you can change things, but it's also fleeting. Like you'll be done with it, and then you'll move on to something else. So that's definitely like great advice I've gotten. In terms of okay, how about this? I'm going to twist so this is political season. So thank you for asking that question, John. Now I'm going to answer the question I wish you had asked, and I'm going to have a fly on my forehead as I do it. But like what advice do I wish I could follow? It's actually kind of a variety, a variation of that, which is be about the process. Be totally about the process, and not necessarily about the result, right? Because there is so much about the result that you just can't control, in terms of how do the reviewers respond, or what does the publisher do with it, or vagaries of marketing stuff where like suddenly this great placement that you were going to get in Barnes and Noble and it disappears, right? Like instead of being like wrecked by that stuff, like, oh God, help me, like no, like that's not the part I can control. I can control this, right? And so like just being, and I think on my best days, honestly, that's what I am. I'm 100% process driven. I'm just about what's on the screen, and I really don't worry about anything else. And then on the other days, I'm checking my Amazon ranking 6 times an hour. So hey, look, I'm as flawed as everyone else, but at least I know what the goal is, right?
I was gonna say I call that balance, All right, last question before I let you go, because I have to ask, can you leave us with a little teaser of what we might expect next from you?
Yes, absolutely, because I'm copy editing it right now. So it is actually, it is ready to go, and it's in the can. It is called Unthinkable, and it is about an ordinary stay-at-home dad who is approached by a shadowy secret society and told that in order to save the lives of 1 billion people, he has to do the unthinkable.
The laundry?
More than the laundry. Damn you, John. That was a good comeback.
Well, he has to do, let me tell you.
Yeah, he has to do the unthinkable, and you'll just have to read the book to find out what the unthinkable is.
That is excellent. I'm riveted already.
Excellent.
All right, so I do have to tell you, as I told your publicist, the wonderful Megan Beatty, that I guess I was ready to bury the hatchet with you. No more grudges, no negativity. It's not like I've been harboring ill feelings since you once inscribed a book to me that said, John, she was better with the Miami Sound Machine.
And I'm absolutely taking that one. I'm gonna die on that hill, John. Gloria Estefan was better with the Miami Sound Machine. I absolutely, it's true. No, you're not feeling this.
All right. Well,
this is my last ever interview with John Valeri, because I've said this again. I've doubled down.
How about I say this? I think she was a better singles artist with the Miami Sound Machine, but a better conceptual album artist solo. Not that you've heard any of her solo albums.
I'll take your word for it, John. You're maybe a touch more knowledgeable about this subject than I am, but I do like her music. I think she's a very talented person for sure.
No, but I'm just kidding. I always enjoy your inscriptions because they are far from the norm, and that always makes me laugh. Whether or not we agree.
Yes, in 2020, John, let's just agree to disagree about Gloria. There's so much other stuff out there.
Yeah, I'm ready to let it go. We can have a single conversation for the sake of this show. But anyway, Brad Parks, it was real pleasure catching up with you. I hope that, someday we'll get to see each other in person again, and we can really, compare hairlines and waistlines and all stuff.
All this to look forward to.
I know.
Awesome, John.
I figured I was going to cuss you off at a certain point. But anyway, Interference is the book. People should pick it up because it is just great escapist fiction. And I thank you for that, because that has been a gift to me in these times, as I can always find myself, free in a book, which is a beautiful thing.
Awesome. John, thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks, Brad.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.